Hi, this is Gary with Aldan American. Today we're going to show you how to set up coilover shocks from scratch. We've got our 4-link, we've got our panhard rod, we've got our axle, everything's in its correct location. Now what we want to do is determine how we're going to do and install our shocks. This frame had already been C-notched previously, but it did not have a boxing plate on the inside, and we also needed to support our shock mount. So what we've done is we've taken 1/8" steel, we've boxed the inside of the frame for the added support because of the C-notch. We also have added this plate to support the shock mount. Our 4-bar mount has 3 holes. We want to start with our center position, and that way if we need to lower it or raise it, we have an inch in either direction. Since we have our 4-bar suspension all set up, now we're going to move on to correct coilover mounting locations. This 4-link suspension has 3 bolt holes for the lower shock mount. So what we have to do is put a spacer in here to mount the shock so that the coilover does not hit the axle housing. So now that we've made our aluminum spacer, that dictates the lower shock mounting location. In turn, we need to figure out where the upper shock mounting location is going to be. So in this case, we have our frame in the way, so we have to work around what is here. So now that we have decided where we can put the upper mount, where the lower mount goes, we also took and put the axle at the ride height we wanted the truck to sit at, and we found out that our 14-inch shock was the correct length shock for this application. The open length, the closed length, and the mid-travel point is 12 inches. So what I've done is I've taken a 1-inch square tubing and I've drilled a 1/2-inch hole at the top and a 5/8 hole at the bottom at 12 inches because that is mid-travel. Our shock bushings are 1 3/8 inches, which is 1 3/75 inches. So what I've done is I've taken my 1-inch square tubing, I've put washers on either side of the bar so that in turn, when I put the tabs on, this spacing is approximately 1/400. That gives us a little bit of squish on the tabs when you go to put the shocks in, because if the shocks are put in absolutely perfect, what'll happen is it's hard to put the bushings in place. Between the aluminum spacer and my bar, I also have washers spaced so that this is exactly centered how the coilover shock is going to be mounted in the chassis. And so what we did at the top is we made a reinforcing plate to reinforce the frame to support the upper tabs on the frame. So as you can see, we've got the shock now installed. When it goes together, the bolts should go in the holes nice and easily without any excessive binding. The top and the bottom should be nice and aligned. There should be no rubbing or interference between any of the coil or the shock with any of the suspension. So now from past experience with this style of a truck, we know as a starting point, we want to put a 250-pound spring. Now, I always look at and try to explain to people that springs should be considered a tuning device. You have to have a starting point, drive the truck, see how it feels, and determine if the spring is too soft or too aggressive, and change accordingly because it's a tuning device. So what we want to do is put 1 inch of preload on the spring, and how 1 inch of preload is determined is we take our tape measure, and it starts as a 10-inch spring. We want to preload the spring so that it is now 9 inches. So when we're talking about preload, it has nothing to do with how many threads are showing or anything like that. It pure and simple is from the bottom of the spring to the top of the spring, 1 inch of preload means the spring is now 9 inches. To adjust our spring preload, we're going to use our spanner wrench. The spanner wrench has a hook on it that fits in the notch on our spring seat, and then you rotate it. We have our ride height set, so now it's time to lock the spring seat in place. We take our Allen wrench, put it on the Allen screw on the lock ring. By using the short end of our Allen wrench, we're going to screw it down until you've got a good amount of resistance, and that's all it really takes to lock that in place. So now that you've got everything installed, obviously this truck is not ready to drive yet, but when we get to the point of being able to drive it, we're going to set it on the ground, we're going to make sure that our ride height comes in where we want, and then on our rebound adjuster, this is the dampening in the shock. So what we want to do is turn it full counterclockwise. Being that this is a lighter weight vehicle, we're probably going to put 1, 2, 3 clicks of adjustment on it as our starting point to go out and drive the vehicle. On this truck we used our urethane bushing. This is one of our urethane bushings. We offer the bushings with either a 1/2 inch or a 5/8 sleeve, depending on the application. We also offer bearings. Now the bearings are 1/2 inch inside diameter, 1 inch overall length, and where we use a bearing is it's a little bit more forgiving on a misalignment issue. So if your shock isn't quite aligned during its travel, a misalignment type bearing will help that. In addition to our standard 1 inch wide bearing, we offer a bearing that's a 1/2 inch ID, that's 1.5 inches wide. We also have a 5/8 inside diameter bearing available. One of the advantages of the 5/8 bearing is we have these misalignment spacers. So by putting the misalignment spacers in, we can have a 1/2 inch bolt hole that's 1.5 inches, 1 3/8 inches, or 1 1/4 inches wide, depending on your application. We also have misalignment spacers that are 5/8 hole that will make them 1 1/4 inches and 1 3/8 inches. I hope you found this video informative and helpful on how to set your 4-bar up, your coilover shocks up. And for any additional questions, you can get a hold of us at aldanamerican.com, or you can leave comments right here on the YouTube.